But also I've talked about David and Lauren about if they're willing to share their videotapes afterwards.
And what did they say?
Or edited.
Well, no, they have to be unedited.
Oh.
But if they can both share their tapes afterwards, then
What the best you
I
was going to say, is that the top of your head or what?
guess we're gonna, I was gonna ask, I'm gonna go crap question.
It isn't in the ceiling, Diane. What did you say?
Technology is great if it only works.
Yeah. Got Barry's
Unreliable.
I have blackberries right now, apricot. They're just on the cusp. No, actually, I don't. Here he does. And, so I buy it from him. And I buy the raspberries from the farm in Brooklyn. Apricots from Fremont.
You know, David, I think we
Oh, yeah. Back in the day, the very first house I bought was in Fremont, in Niles District, when I was 22 years old. And from the freeway to where Niles District was farms or apricot groves. And I used to wonderful farms on the side of the road to buy fresh watermelon, fresh corn, tomatoes, and all that stuff.
I'll take the car, guys. Just went down. Put in a new thing. So on the TV show, I put up a new submission. Both of them. One of which said, I'll tell you one second. I own, I have That's right. I said,
The second part, next page. In fact, dogs are there. They better say about that.
Well, yeah, that's on that or on here.
It's actually a movement. No, they paid $30 a month. Go to, and then before I knew it, 2 months later, it's over 8:30. It's all houses now, but it's not agricultural any longer. And so they all have to go to the
They're selling to suburban counties, they're restricting this is going in. Very good. Yeah.
Sorry for that delay. Jose and I needed to get the computer set up just for note taking. I think Jose's set on that now. It's not paper. Thank you all for being here today. Remember, I'm David Early, Community Environment. This is the second meeting of the committee creating the ad hoc committee that's discussing the creation of a forum for Measure A. At our last meeting, we agreed, I think, on a couple of things. We agreed that the meeting format would have essentially three parts. The first part would be a presentation on the history of Measure A by Woody Minor. The second would be a panel discussion on...
No.
Could I perhaps finish what I understand to have been what we decided, and then if there's disagreement, we can talk about that further? It sounds like you might disagree.
I do.
Okay. It had been my understanding that we had decided that the second part would be a panel decision on some form regarding the benefits and limitations of Measure A, and that the nature of that panel was not yet decided, but that the committee would solicit suggestions as to who the panelists might be, and that I know those have been solicited, and that the committee would attempt to decide today who the panelists would be. And that sounds like there's some disagreement as to whether that was decided.
Well, we didn't.
It was my understanding then that the third part of the forum would be public input of some form, and that the format of that public input was also not yet totally determined. So I think it sounds like we should begin with a discussion of perhaps my misunderstanding of what had been decided. I don't know if all the committee members agree that my understanding is incorrect, or if that's just one or two. Please.
The word should not be panel discussion. We all agree that there would be presenters, not a panel. There would be presenters, and that each side would pick 3 presenters. Now, today, as far as I'm concerned, I'm totally in agreement with Pat's her position on this, because it reflects mine exactly. Those rules were already set up, and it's now we're going to do the when, the where, and the for how long, and set the parameters with regards to the speaking. I talked to Woody this morning.
Okay, I'm sorry, if I could, I know I'm interrupting, but I think that that's...
Well, it's okay for you to do it, but not for me.
No, it's okay, you did interrupt me too. And what I'd like to...
And you stopped me.
Right, what I'd like to suggest is
I'm not through yet, David.
you've
This
made-
is moving.
You've made a point as to how you think we're moving forward. Before you go into the details, I think it would be appropriate for us to find out from all the committee members if that's exactly where we all think we are. But go ahead and finish if you think you have other things relevant to that question. It sounds to me like there's not agreement as to even what's been decided to date, and I think we need to decide, we need to get that agreement first.
Well, I think we got an email from Kathy saying that, what that decision was. And my understanding was Diane's understanding that there would be a program, and there would be presenters presenting the pro Measure A portion, and those, a portion of the program would be the reasons why it would be a good idea to modify Measure A. And that was my understanding. The panel discussion portion where perhaps you got confused is that I think when we talked about the question and answer period from the audience, who would respond to those questions? And I think it was Ann who mentioned that perhaps that should be a panel during the question and answer portion. And maybe that's where you got it, and that was not decided. But what was decided is that there would be a set amount of time divided between pro and con, and that we would solicit speakers that this committee could select off of to present the pro and con of that issue. The housing element, Measure A has to do with the housing element and transportation. So that was my understanding, and I believe Kathy sent us a memo on that, which I think I have. That,
if I could take a step back and ask about that, I'm working from a one-page document, which I think I see some of you holding, that says at the top, Measure A Forum Ad Hoc Committee, recommendations to the City of Alameda Planning Board, then it says meeting format, and it has 3 numbered points.
yes, but that is correct. Kathy sent that out, but
And
That is
that's-
not correct.
Okay, that is what was prepared by my office. It is what I'm working from, and it's at least a piece of paper that we all have to look at together.
Yes, but Kathy sent us something else from her office and from her understanding. Kathy, I'll have to search for my copy of
Yeah,
that.
it's basically, it's the same thing, and I can tell you, it says.
Did it include this panel discussion?
Yeah, number 2 was panel discussion of some form to discuss facts, limitations, and benefits of Measure A.
Well, that's what he produced also, but that was not my understanding either. I
Okay.
don't know about anybody else,
Well,
but
Diane
it wasn't my
suggested that we
understanding.
use the word presenters to discuss facts, limitations, and
Yes.
benefits. I
Yes.
think that would be fine with me, certainly, and is that?
Because panel is
So-
different than a presenter.
Right, so can we begin by agreeing that for the next few moments, we'll work from this piece of paper?
No,
No, you don't.
I'm tired of pushing your
and
words
hear-
into my mouth.
Can we go around and hear from each of the panel members briefly about what?
Okay.
Well, why don't you just say, raise your hand if you, last time, if your recollection of what happened was that there would be 3 speakers chosen by each side and a presentation by Woody Minor. And if you disagree, keep your hand down. That's fine.
Great.
It's, as facilitator, I must say, I agree with the people who've kept their hands down. I think that what was
You don't get to
agreed,
vote, you know something? You don't get to vote.
We're
I'm
still
not voting.
having a discussion.
we're having a discussion, and I think Marilyn's idea to each go around and say where we think we stand may be a good idea. I'm sorry, I had mistakenly thought that the notes that I just held up and that I'll hold up again were an accurate representation of what was decided last time. I'm hearing that they're clearly not, in all your opinions, an accurate representation of what was decided last time. So I think we need to go around and hear about what was decided in each of your minds. I'm going to suggest again, and I think some of you will reject this, that we could refer to this piece of paper since at least everyone has it. Some of you don't even want to begin with this piece of paper, that's fine too. It's the only thing I have in front of me is what I thought was a notation of what we had decided last time. But let's go around. Diane, maybe we can start with you again, just to make sure you've made all your points, and then we'll go on to Marilyn and go around. Just in terms of where you think we stand.
Well, when I saw the word panel, it just completely blew me away. We're supposed to have, why did you solicit from the public speakers if that wasn't what we were talking about in the first place? We were talking about getting public input on possible presenters, speakers, not somebody to sit on a panel and answer questions.
Could I want to hear that as a question. You did use the word why, and I'd like to respond. May I do that?
You already did that. You said why. That's your recollection.
David,
I'd like to hear your response, and perhaps others would too.
Well, with Marilyn's permission, I'll just try and respond by saying, to me, panel discussion and presenters were synonymous terms. And I apologize for any misunderstanding that might have created. I, for one, as the person who oversaw the drafting of this one page, would be very happy to change the word panel discussion to presenters. I absolutely intended that it would be a group of people. Some people are saying it's apparently 6. I don't recall having agreed to that number, and I don't think that number is in the notes that we wrote out. But I certainly understood that there would be some number of presenters who I thought would sit on a panel who would be selected by this group. I'm happy to delete the word panel and talk about
3
presenters.
each. That was the consensus.
Well, it doesn't matter whether it was 3 or 15. So what is more important is how long each position has to present their position. And then if you want 15 people within your time limit, hey, I don't.
Well, Pat, I'm actually going to do what I was already asked to do, which is ask each of the 6 of you to talk
Okay,
about where we
that's fine.
stand. Diane, do you feel complete at this point with your thoughts on where we stand right now?
Yeah, just so long as we're talking about presentations and speakers and not a panel.
Okay. Marilyn, where do you think we stand right now?
I think that the 3 items you listed are roughly what we had come up with, although I have to say that there was not a great deal of time to arrive at consensus at the last meeting because we kind of got to that point very late in the session. And after seeing the speakers come in, I'm really impressed that I think we've had a lot of great submittals of speakers come in. One of the things that occurs to me, yes, I think it's important to know the history of Measure A. I don't know that Woody Minor is the only one to present that. I think he's.
I thought we already agreed to this.
I'm still talking.
Marilyn's talking about where we are, and we'll go to Barbara and we'll go around the room.
What I think as a historian, he certainly has that perspective, but Measure A is also, it was illegal, it was a governmental decision, it's been amended over the years, there have been legal challenges, so I do think we need to hear from someone in city government, whether it's one person or a collection of people, someone from city attorney's staff. I mean, because there certainly are documents that help give us an objective overview that I think would be helpful. And again, we're trying to all have a clearer understanding and help the public have a clearer understanding of Measure A. And then in terms of the panel discussion or presenters, I do think that some of that is a semantic issue. I went over I'm not even sure how many.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
going to interrupt
just-
you also,
yeah.
because I think the important point right now is to see where we all stand.
So
Rather than
briefly,
going
okay.
forward, you've pretty much said you think
No,
that.
let me just
Okay,
finish
go
my
on.
thought. But, so I also think we need to decide today how many sessions we're talking about, whether all this can be accomplished in one or perhaps 2 sessions. Because I do think it's important to hear from experts, people with expertise in various fields, whether they're local residents with expertise or various professionals.
You know what, excuse me,
I
I object.
no.
I object to this
You can
because
object
this is
when
not.
you have the
Marilyn,
table.
look, what
No.
he just said, he cut Diane off, he said, we were talking about
Pat,
is that
I'm going to
item.
finish what I'm saying.
No,
Just
you
hold
know,
on.
Marilyn, you know what, you're going off on a tangent, like you always do, and that is not what we're talking about,
Pat.
whether.
Okay.
Pat, I
What
need
should
to ask
be.
you that one of our ground rules that we have agreed to is to treat each other with respect. It's
Exactly,
bad
but
enough
you know
that
what,
we're not-
let's treat our time with respect too. That we don't need to go off on these tangents that have nothing to do with the issue you have stated. That's not the issue
I
you stated.
can actually agree with you on that. I would ask you to not speak to any committee member in a disrespectful way about past, present, or future actions on their part. Marilyn, I do think I'd like to ask you to either wrap up now or very soon, just on the question of whether you feel like that I, in this memo, have accurately summarized where we are. And I think if I can summarize what I think I did hear you say is that this is an accurate representation of what we agreed to, although you are suggesting a few changes to
We
it
may
as we
need to
move forward.
expand the
Yeah.
list within that framework of the
Yeah.
3 points
Okay.
raised.
So Barbara, how do you feel about the 3 points I put together in terms of where we stand?
Well, the second point is, the first line is incorrect, because what we agreed to was that we would solicit public suggestions for foreign speakers. And I don't think we agreed on the number of speakers, but we did agree in concept that each side would have equal time and equal opportunity to present their opinions. And so the idea was that we did agree that Woody Minor would come first. Now, if the planning board members decide to back down on that, I can't prevent them, but we did agree on the first one. The second one, it was public speakers to present the facts, and we did, we agreed that each side, if we couldn't come to an agreement on the 6 on all the speakers, that each side would pick their own speaker. And that's in writing, and we did. And one thing that we had that should determine all this is that members of both the planning board, some members of the planning board and some members of the appellants agreed that something we should set would be the length of the meeting, the time of day, and day of week, because that would determine how long we allotted to each side. And that affects item 2, which we're discussing. And so, and we weren't allowed to come to that conclusion. But I think it's probably the primary thing that we should be discussing now, because people from both sides wanted to do that. And I think the panel got into the fact in number 3 that we would have people sitting up there, appellants, planning board members, speakers, that would sort of form a panel for a Q&A session. And I think that's where the idea of a panel came in.
I agree.
And Jim Sweeney actually taped the meeting, and if we can't agree on what was done, I would suggest that we adjourn this meeting, go back to those tapes, play them, and find out what was actually said.
Well, you know, I do want to go around to the other side of the room. Kathy and I just conferred, and she confirmed my recollection that the document that you have before you is actually one that we wrote collectively and projected on the screen.
No, excuse me, but this paragraph, the second paragraph in item 2 was what we put on the screen.
That's right.
And the first line that had panel discussion was not on the screen. So we went over and we edited that long paragraph quite a bit, and we did all come to a mutual agreement on that paragraph.
That is my recollection.
But once again, if we can't agree on what was said and done at the last one, then I think we need to adjourn the meeting and play Jim Sweeney's tapes and find out what was actually said.
Okay. Is that a formal proposal you're making at this time?
Yes, I am, because we can't have endless ad hoc committee meetings because people decide to change what it had, we don't already agreed on. If we're not going to agree on something and stick to it, then why are we meeting?
So I feel a deference to Ann, Pat, and Rebecca that they should be allowed to say where they stand too. So if I could, I'd hold your suggestion to dismiss, to adjourn this meeting in abeyance, hear from the three of them, and then we'll consider whether to adjourn the meeting or not. Ann?
I pretty much agree with the statement that you made. I think we actually really made very little progress. The last meeting, we didn't get very far. We agreed that Woody Minor would be one speaker, and he would talk about the history. I know there was some discussion about what the history would include, and I don't think we concluded that discussion, but at least Woody would discuss it up to a certain point. I don't think we decided whether he would be the only history speaker or not. I don't think that we did that. And so I think that we probably have some more to do on that item. On the second one, I agree with the sort of bulk of the statement, whether it's panel or presenters. I think I kind of agree it's a semantic thing right now. I think we need to look at the form of the workshop and then decide whether it's presenters or panel. We haven't really talked about the format of the workshop. We agreed that we were going to solicit speakers from the public, and there are a lot of speakers. And I also remember that we agreed that we would try to reach consensus and not kind of go into this appellant size, supporters of Measure A and all that. We try to reach consensus on a spectrum of speakers who can address the issues the public has raised.
And I think that's written in the paragraph that most of us seem to recall we wrote together. That long paragraph, which I think did come out of the meeting, says the committee will select speakers from this list of suggestions by consensus. And so you're suggesting that that is something that was up on the screen and that everyone agreed to?
Yeah.
The long paragraph.
In the long paragraph.
Yeah. The other thing that was on the screen that we didn't agree to, which I was hoping was where we would start, was that there was what topics we would try to cover in the workshop, whether that be those in housing, traffic, economic development, and those sorts of things. And that was a list that I think Marilyn proposed, and I would sort of assume we would start there, but let's hear what the rest of the panel thinks.
I agree that the problem was in the confusion on that presenters versus panel had to do with the Q&A after the presenters made their presentations. As far as someone other than Woody Minor, of course, if we've decided, and that's, in my opinion, what we're here to do today, is decide where, when, and how long. If we decide that this meeting is going to be 30 minutes covering the benefits of Measure A and 30 minutes of the restraints of Measure A, then within that 30-minute time period, this committee can select as many speakers as they wish within that given time period. In other words, if you want 30 speakers in 30 minutes at 1 minute each, that's up to the committee to decide that. So I don't have any problem with that. I do have a bit of an issue with the last sentence in that second paragraph where it says the speakers will speak on issues suggested by the committee or any other relevant issues. However, our mission, as stated by the City Council, was we were to talk about Measure A as it affects the housing element and transportation. I don't think it covered that mission from the City Council, the environment, legal issues, other than how they apply within the given presentation by either side. In other words, if the pro majoré group decide to select a speaker which will cover the legal challenges and how those were defeated, then that's up to that portion of the committee to decide that. So I don't know why it becomes an issue that we need somebody other than Woody Minor to present the history. If you want to talk about legal issues, as Marilyn suggested, perhaps that's something that can be covered within the presentation itself. I think we're headed towards, if we keep talking about all of these side issues, that we're losing sight of what our mission statement was. And our mission statement is to talk about Measure A as it deals with the housing element and transportation, period. And that's my understanding of my mission, and I certainly don't recall, and perhaps it's my bad memory, that we agreed that we would select topics other than those topics for the speakers to speak on. That's my understanding, that that's what we're talking about, is that very limited venue. And today, in my estimation, we've already decided these things. We need to clear up a couple of lines, but what's more important to me is because, of course, we can't move forward with any of the speakers to give them material to work on until we know where, when, and how long. And to me, those are the basic issues that need to be covered so we can move forward with the people who have agreed to be potential speakers for this program. You have to consider people's own schedules and time limits, etc. So I would prefer, Barbara, I would prefer not to end this meeting. I would prefer to move forward and say, let's make a decision on the things that are important, which is, in my memo, the length of meeting, where the meeting's going to be, and how long it's going to be. And I think that's the only thing that's salient. All of these other issues as to whether we have a staff member or a lawyer or anybody else, hey, if you select that person as a speaker, that's great, but we don't need to decide that today. We need to decide these other issues in whatever time frame we assign to each position, because whether anybody wants to agree to it or not, if there were not new two positions in this question, we wouldn't even be here at all. So I think that's the sensible, logical way to approach this. Thank you.
Rebecca, where do you think we stand relative to this sheet of notes or anything else you think as to what we've decided so far?
Well, I think this is a fairly accurate presentation of where we ended up last time. I do agree, and I don't think there's disagreement that we all agreed that Woody Minor would be one of the presenters, that he would present the history. I think that there is some question, where we go today as we talk about the next speakers, whether there should be some supplement to that history or not. I think the paragraph under item number 2 also is an accurate reflection. It does not limit us in terms of specific numbers of speakers, nor does it, and it assumes that we would try to come to a consensus, and only if we could not come to a consensus would we revert back to splitting the committee and allowing each side, if you will, to select their own speakers. So I think we're still trying to move towards a consensus today, and I agree with Pat that we should continue to try to do that. I think we also agreed on that we would have some form of public input. I guess I think what we need to focus on today is not only the speakers but also the venue. But I kind of differ in that I think we perhaps need to talk about speakers and the format and what we're trying to accomplish, which goes back to the mission, to get to where that venue should be and how long it should take.
All right. So I think we've all stated where we are on this. I heard some points of agreement and some points of disagreement, but we actually have a proposal on the floor from Barbara to adjourn the meeting. And so I think we need to take that up immediately. Is that proposal still active, Barbara?
Yeah, because I hear people recanting what they said at the last meeting, and if we're just going to redo the last meeting today, it's wasting all of our time. So I respect the time of the planning board members. They're volunteers just like we are. And so
procedurally, as I understand, the committee works by consensus, and the meeting has been opened, and we're meeting from 1 to 4, so I believe it would take a consensus of all of you to decide to adjourn the meeting.
Sure, I mean, I'm willing to go along.
So Barbara's made a suggestion that the meeting be adjourned. Do people want to discuss that further?
You know, yeah.
Adjourn and a transcript being made from the recording.
Right.
I think that one of the problems here, I think that most of us have a pretty good idea of what transpired last time. A very good idea of what transpired. But I think what we're getting bogged down to is parsing your memo or your idea of what the summary was. And I really don't like that because that's your agenda. And why we're getting into that, why don't we just move on and instead of keep parsing your memo?
Okay.
Because you're not the
That's-
chairperson and you don't set the agenda.
That's a fine suggestion. I am the facilitator.
But you
and
were hired by Kathy, not by us.
That's absolutely correct. One of the ground rules that you did agree to would be that there would be no chair and I would be the facilitator. That's in the ground rules that we suggested to you and that you did agree to by consensus. Now, certainly by consensus, you can decide that I should not facilitate or that you would like a chair. And I'd be happy to facilitate that discussion as well. Right now, I'm trying to facilitate a discussion, Barbara, on your suggestion that the meeting be adjourned. I've heard Diane comment on that, although I couldn't really understand if you were saying that you thought adjournment was a good idea or not.
No, I didn't make a statement on that. I made a statement that we're parsing your version of what happened.
Okay. I would like to
Let's
focus
just go
on...
around, people say yes or no.
To
Either
adjourning
one
the
could
meeting.
adjourn the meeting and get a
Okay.
transcript,
Well,
or
wait
not.
a minute. I want to know, Barbara, what is it that is bothering, if I might?
Please.
What is it that, what statement, what portion of this, if we've changed panel to presenters, what portion of this that is still bothersome to you?
Okay, the first one, we had agreed that Woody Minor would make a presentation on the history.
Yes.
And we did agree that each side would, if we couldn't agree on the speakers, which is 99%
Covers that in
likely, each
paragraph.
side would pick their own.
Right.
But now I hear that Woody Minor is not going to be the only one to give a history.
Well, no, I don't, is that an
was just
accepted
Marilyn's
fact, or is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I could interject, I heard from Marilyn a suggestion, an acknowledgement that what was decided was to have Woody, and a suggestion that she would like the committee to come back and reopen that question and see if another speaker could be
Well,
added
that's-
under number one.
see,
But I think Marilyn and others agreed
And
that the basic decision was to have Woody, and that, and I'm now hearing a suggestion that some people would like to see if maybe it should be more than Woody. But I think everyone agreed that what we agreed for the first part of the meeting was that Woody would make a presentation.
If I could continue to answer Pat's question before I was interrupted, this meeting will be a lot shorter. So to answer your question, I thought we settled that Woody Minor would give a history, and then each side, which, since we couldn't agree,
Right.
would not be able to agree on speakers, each side would pick their own speakers. And furthermore, there was no agreement that we would be restricted or expanded by Maryland's list. Every time she said that, I said, you can talk about whatever you want to.
Right.
I placed no restrictions on what the planning board members, which you discussed, or what their speakers could have discussed, because, you know, it's the First Amendment.
Right.
So, there wasn't even anything close that we would decide on a list of topics to be covered. And that's so fundamental that that's why I think we need to adjourn the meeting and get a transcript of what was actually said.
Mhm.
And, you know, I mean, if we're just gonna review and decide what was said last time wasn't said for 3 hours here, it's a waste of time. I respect the time of everybody here.
Okay, so Barbara, you're continue to suggest that the meeting should be adjourned, and one of the other concerns I hear you saying is that the last...
And the transcript be
Right,
made.
and the transcript be made, and one of the things I'm hearing is that you're particularly concerned that the last sentence under the long paragraph under number 2 is inaccurate, that says that speakers
No,
who speak on issues suggested by the committee.
no, I don't disagree with the contents of the long paragraph at all.
Okay.
That was me. I was the one who did
Oh, right,
that
I'm sorry.
sentence. That was me.
I'm just trying to help understand the reasons. I think Pat asked, what are some of the reasons you'd
Right.
like to hear the meeting adjourned?
Well-
And the transcript.
Right, but before I vote on that, can we say, Barbara, that if we agree that Woody Minor was the person we all agreed to, and that if Marilyn and Rebecca wish to open the issue of adding a second speaker to discuss that, would that still make you think we need to go back and have a transcript? Because what I hear Mr. Early saying is that, yes, he agrees, that's what we agreed to, was just Woody Minor. But that they're throwing open another option, so it's not like they're misquoting what was said, they're trying to change it or add to it. And that's, I think, am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's.
And
how
so
I-
if that's the case, are you willing to discuss and try to reach a consensus that there would be someone in addition to Woody Minor, even though we've agreed that Woody would be the historian? And the other thing you gotta consider in all of this is, you can keep adding things and people until we have a, 16-hour marathon forum. And for, the management of that is that we would have one presenter who would do the history, and then we would have a time period in which both sides of the issue were presented. That's how I understood it, and that's how you understood it. Now, I don't think they're saying that we've agreed to that, to what Marilyn's saying. They're saying they want us to discuss it again. Am I correct in that?
That's how I understand the request.
Yeah, well, I
I'm somewhat confused right now. There's a very specific proposal on the floor from Barbara to adjourn this meeting and call for a transcript. I'm trying to determine whether this meeting will continue or not. That's really the question I think we have to address first. Ann?
I'd like to continue the meeting. I think that, that this is an accurate description of what we decided last time. I think that there's more issues in addition to discuss. I think the public has done an amazing job of providing us names to consider. It shows the breadth of interest in this topic, and I think that we owe it to the public, council, and the planning board to keep working on this.
Okay, so Barbara would like to adjourn the meeting, call for a transcript. Ann would like to keep the meeting going. Marilyn?
I concur with Dan. I think that, we've told a lot of people here, there's a lot to talk about. I don't think we should avoid talking about it. And as far as the history of Measure A, I distinctly remember bringing the topic up before and pretty much being shouted down with, oh no, you don't need to look beyond this and such day, no, you don't need to look at the red book, no, you don't. I'm just saying, take a look. It's, we're talking about facts, we're talking about documented events. So, but for the greater purpose of what you're trying to do, I think, of course we should continue. We're all here convened, we're ready to go, and the public has been very generous with their time in submitting possible speakers, and we have a lot to discuss.
So Barbara suggested the meeting should be adjourned. A transcript called. Ann and Marilyn think that we should keep meeting. Diane?
There's nobody, Marilyn, that told you, don't look at the red brick building. And the other thing is that if you want to do that, the last paragraph here says something about after a period of discussion, if consensus cannot be reached on speaker selection. I was under the impression, and I feel that the only pertinent thing is that the appellants pick their own speakers, planning board pick their own speakers. If they want to bring in, like Pat said, an attorney, if they want to bring in anybody, that's fine. We have nothing to say about who they pick or the subject they want to talk on. It's supposed to be the advantages and constraints of Measure A. And so I did have a little bit of a problem with that sentence in your thing, but again, I'm parsing this of yours, and there was no real consensus on format for our Q&A. It was left open that if anybody wanted to, we would examine that at some other time. When you have a Q&A,
Yeah, I would
You
like
want to
to.
continue the meeting or not?
There's a question on the floor from Barbara as to whether the meeting should be adjourned and a transcript called for, or whether we should continue to meet. Barbara suggested that we should adjourn and get the transcript. Marilyn and Ann have stated that they think we should continue. I know you've had a lot of great comments, but I haven't really understood your thought as to whether we should adjourn right now or continue.
Well, I would like to know if that is the planning board's recollection also about whether or not each side picks their own and the other side has no input.
Diane, I'm sorry, I'm going to need to ask you to either give an answer, your answer to the question of whether to adjourn or not, or perhaps go to Pat and Rebecca, who haven't spoken on that yet. Do you have an opinion as to whether the meeting should be adjourned or continued at this time?
If there's no agreement with regards to no one has any interference with what anybody's speakers, and we definitely do not have to go off some particular list, that it's up to each side to pick their own speakers. If I have a consensus on that, then I'd be willing to follow
So you're
it.
saying
If I don't,
you can't give an answer to the question of whether to adjourn or not without knowing whether or not people believe, and I think you're suggesting that it's an error that it says here that the committee will select speakers from this list by consensus, and if after a period of discussion no consensus can be reached, then separate selections would be made. You're suggesting that it's an error to say that the committee would try and do this by consensus, and that in fact what was actually decided at the previous meeting is that each of the two groups here, so to speak, would choose several speakers. You think that's what was decided last time?
Yeah.
And you need to know which of those two things the rest of the group believes in order to let people know whether the meeting would continue.
yes.
Okay. Barbara, would it be all right with you, as the maker of this suggestion, that we digress from your suggestion and find out what the committee believes in terms of the desire for consensus regarding the speakers in order for Diane to be able to decide whether she thinks the meeting should adjourn?
I will if I can bring up the topic of, does anybody on this committee believe that we'll reach a consensus on the speakers? Or is the only reasonable thing to expect that each side will pick their own speakers?
Why don't we start talking and see if we can come to consensus? That's the only way we'll know.
Yeah. I will say
This is
that.
unrealistic. I mean, you know, we aren't going to agree on Dina Belzer. We aren't going to agree on Eve Bach. I mean, you know, some of these suggestions are absolutely ludicrous. And I think, you know, I've sat through a lot of meetings, and the only reasonable conclusion that we can talk, you know, for 3 hours, and then we'll decide at the very end, oh, well, each side will get to pick their own speaker.
So procedurally, I think where we stand is that there's a suggestion on the floor to adjourn the meeting, and we're going to hold that in abeyance. We're going to switch to the discussion of whether or not the committee is going to try to select speakers by consensus. And then, based on the outcome of that discussion, which obviously means having a meeting during that period at least, we'll come back to the question of whether to adjourn.
I'm willing to let the meeting go on for 20 minutes to see if we can come to a consensus on, can we, both sides agree on speakers, or do we have to pick our own?
Okay. So you're actually suggesting that we not discuss whether we think it will be possible to come to consensus on speakers, but actually to try and reach consensus on speakers.
No, I'd like to go around and see if people realistically think that this committee will come to a consensus on speakers together.
Okay, so is that acceptable, everyone? We're not going to talk about adjourning the meeting.
David, Rebecca's had her hand up to speak. Before we keep going to different topics, maybe we could let her.
I can't
We've kind
hear
of
her.
lost sight of the ground rules here in a big way, which is frustrating to me. But I do want to continue the meeting. I don't agree with Diane that we had an agreement last time that we would split and each select speakers. But
Well, that's what
when
I
I
said.
did, well, only if we could reach
The
consensus.
last
yeah.
resort.
But I think Barbara has raised a good point. I mean, I came into this actually hoping that we could work together, but I'm not at all convinced that we can come to a consensus, honestly, on this. I think it's just much too contentious.
Why would we?
Well, because we're trying to, in my mind, and why I came here was to try to get information out to the public. And we may have different objectives in that. I don't know. That was my objective. And then also to get some feedback from the citizens of Alameda. And, you know, I think Barbara, at this point, you know, I think Barbara's raising a good point. I just don't know. We could sit here for hours, and I think we'd all like to come to a consensus, but perhaps realistically we won't.
Well, I extremely, but I do think that getting information out to the public is getting both sides of the issue out to the public. I don't want some WRT whitewash.
So Marilyn, you'll be next, but I think where we are right now is I've actually heard Barbara and Rebecca perhaps agreeing on something. I think we should note that. And that is a tentative suggestion that maybe it is asking too much to expect that the committee would agree on 4 or 6 or 8 speakers, and that or presenters or panelists, whatever word we use, and that maybe it is more realistic to go ahead and choose a total number of panelists, divide that number by 2, and ask each of the 2 groups to choose that number of panelists. So I think that's something I heard both Barbara and Rebecca suggesting maybe a more expedient approach.
Actually, along those lines, while we were talking, I was multitasking at the same time, but I counted up the list of names that Kathy submitted to us. There are 66 different speakers that have been submitted, some of them by more than one person. And I also did a list of the various topics that they are wanting to talk about. And it seems to me that even before, out of 66 speakers, there might be some agreement on one. We might not get every agreement on every point, but I think we owe it to the public. I think we owe it to the taxpayers of the city,
You're
to
lecturing
the public.
me, a city council member, about over the public?
I think that we are here using taxpayer dollars and time of staff and the public who's come out. And I believe that we can have a civil discussion, an informative discussion that fairly hears from both sides of the issue, or however many sides. I'm not sure it's only 2. But I think that it's kind of interesting to look at the various topics that came up and the various speakers, because there were biographies. I actually sat down and tried to put the name of the speaker. And I only alphabetized them. I didn't look at who had submitted them. But there may be, you know, we came to, at least we put down on the board a list of maybe 8 different topics that Measure 8 touches on. It may be that there are speakers who can speak to some of those topics, and that might be a way to address it. And of course, if we're going to have a full and fair airing of the subject, we need to know who you want to hear from. Well, I know you submitted yourselves, but I'm sure there's a lot of possibilities, but we're not going to get there if we don't keep talking. And I think we're here. We've set aside this amount of time. Let's work forward.
Okay, so, and I think for at least the time being, people decided to put on hold the question of whether to adjourn. I want to come back to what I did here as a relatively concrete, I think very concrete from Barbara, and perhaps tepid support from Rebecca, that maybe it's asking too much to do what the notes say to agree on a set of speakers, and that it would be, and I think Marilyn's just spoken against this idea, but there's a suggestion certainly from Barbara to just say we probably can't agree